So today, again, kind of a parallel to last session. If you were in that session, you saw, the times they're changing for boards too. So we're going to talk about what board members and board leaders tell us they're experiencing and feeling. I mean, obviously there's a lot of variety there, but just talk a little bit about that. Talk about the imperative of growing and sustaining this culture of empathy on part of all who are involved in leadership and governance of agencies. Probably the core of what we're talking about, 5 key ways that if you're a chief executive, or, this applies to other executives too, but particularly the chief executive, executive director, how can you support your board at this time to help them be effective and successful and support you and the agency? And last chunk of our session, of course, is more explicitly, what do you think? What's your experience? Hearing more from you, but don't wait until that end in order to bring this up. So, again, same slide as last week, but the topic is plays a little bit differently. Obviously, as nonprofits and as our board members, people are dealing with the pandemic, they're dealing with the economy and with civil unrest, disruptions, things of that sort. But of course, when we're thinking about the experiences our board members are having, a key part of that is that they're experiencing, I mean, not that you're not, but the personal tensions as well as organizational tensions. Each of these things is playing out in a way that affects an agency, but it's also affecting each of us in our individual lives, whether we're board members, executives, whatever that role can be. It's interesting, as I've been looking at and analyzing more of what's happening to agencies over the last few months. Initially, we were drawing a lot of comparisons to the Great Recession and the things that were agencies were going through. Sometimes ended up being called sort of a triple whammy because agencies were getting higher, particularly intervention, emergency assistance agencies, community-based agencies. They were getting hit with more demands for services. Their clients needed more. At the same time that their resources, giving and other revenues were not keeping up. If you had investments and were fortunate enough, your endowments at that time were crashing in many cases. This time, we're actually in an even more interesting, if you can call it that, kind of a situation, because the market, if you have investments, is actually hanging in there, but there are so many other intersecting tensions at this time that it really is very stressful for everybody. It's unique to each person and their own situation, whether you have kids, elderly parents, all those kinds of things that are on the personal side, as well as just trying to make life work for you. And then we've got the organizational side, and we have to figure out how to try to strike that balance as we're going through this. I showed this slide last week. It's relevant to both of our sessions, supporting executives and supporting boards. Ideally, we've got a pivotal partnership. Boards and their executives are working together. They're interdependent, and so we need the levels of trust, candor, respect, and honest communication. You'll hear that a lot from me today, I think. But this is a great, easy thing to say. I think it's a great quote. I put it up. It's from Board Source, one of their publications. But under stress, stuff just really gets messy, it gets ugly, and frankly, we get yanked around by whatever the most urgent is. And one of my pitches for us as executives supporting and leading boards, and for board leaders, chairs, vice chairs, etc., is to try to help people continue to make sense of this. I mean, it's a critical time for leadership, and people are experiencing what they're experiencing. So everybody has their own sort of mix of challenges, but what are we hearing from boards? Well, candidly, very few people on boards, in some ways, nobody has ever been in a situation quite like the one we are in right now. Now, that's not to say all agencies are equally challenged or equally challenged in the multiple ways of these various forces that are going on, but a whole lot of board members are just kind of feeling like, geez, where do I even start? We've read, you've suffered through my workshops maybe, or other things. We know we're legally accountable for the performance and sustainability of the agency. But what does that mean? What does that mean to us at this time? And frankly, I trust, partly because you're motivated to even be on this session, it's probably not happening in your organizational situation, but a lot of boards are feeling isolated. They're feeling disconnected. Where do we fit? And they, in a sense, executives have, I don't mean this rudely, but they've let themselves off the hook by saying, you know, the building's on fire or this is on fire, I've got to go put the fire out, then I'll get back to taking care of the board. Now, if things really, you know, you have an emergency, yes, you certainly have to take care of that, especially when client safety, other things like that, well, staff safety and health as well, are at stake. That's an issue. But don't let the urgent drive out the important, which is the partnership and the way to capitalize on what ideally a board is there to provide in the way of not only leadership and oversight, but support and engagement, including for you. A lot of nonprofit leaders on both the volunteer and the staff side are feeling stressed with a lot of sense of loss. You know, I didn't sign up for this. This is just not what I thought this was going to be like. You know, heaven help anybody who thought this is what we were going to be like. I don't know how you would have forecast in January of 2020 that, you know, July of 2020 was going to have the blend of and trends that we're experiencing here. So, you know, it's easy to say it, but at best it is a pivotal partnership. Boards and their executives work together. It really is essential that we have, it calls for us to make a mutual investment in each other and really think about how do we support each other at this challenging time. The board is, and it's quirky, and I want to talk explicitly about that for a bit. The board's accountable, it has that formal legal authority, and yet, you know, there is this phenomenon. Our colleagues, Bob Herman and Dick Heimovix, faculty colleagues at UMKC, who are both retired now, but did really great research 15, 20, 25 years ago. They coined the phrase psychological centrality. The board is legally in charge, and yet the executive has psychological centrality in that relationship. The executive is there more often, day to day, has more information, often is part of the professional or the mission category in a way that board members are not. Board members bring other perspectives, talents, and assets, but they're not of the business usually. That's not always true, of course, but it depends. The fact that executives have more information, they're there every day, that means that we've got this weird balance of power and interdependence. And candidly, part of the challenge that's so important is that executives have to think about moderating and balancing that. Now, by the way, that's an interesting point to think about, even in the larger context of systemic problems, maybe racism, other balances where clients who are really in an interdependent relationship with us as agencies, but they too don't have power that they need. Well, we have to balance that power by actively thinking about how to structure and support these relationships to achieve a level of parity that allows everybody to do what they best need to do to enable us to achieve the impact for the community that we're here to achieve. So, and by the way, it's got to start with, and you're going to hear this more times than you probably want, but it's so critical at a time of major change. Clarifying roles, and you know, you've got the basics that are written into law, but you know, those are just the basics. The question is, as we're going through these bumpy dynamic times, what are each of us doing? What is each of us doing? And how do we collectively come together to make this work? It is about shared leadership. Now, a little jargony, but I, you know, have to celebrate the work, including a book that my colleagues Bob and Dick prepared in 1991. Candidly, that was the year the Midwest Center was formed. I was still in Minneapolis. I wasn't down here at the time. But one of the reasons I came to Kansas City was to work with these guys because they had written one of the more insightful, maybe most insightful books on true realities of executive work in agencies. And what they highlighted is that, and this is based on research they did on Kansas City nonprofits, the most effective executive directors, CEOs, whatever label you want to put to that position, are effective to a significant degree, not solely, because they accept responsibility for enabling, supporting, and facilitating their board's work and success. And I get people who, frankly, often have a little less experience, or they're trying to still puzzle this out, and I say, well, wait a minute, the board's in charge. The board's my boss. You know, doesn't always feel like it, and sometimes it's weird when it does. But the reality is, this needs to be a team relationship where we're each bringing talents and perspectives, and that raises the question, well, so what does the executive bring to enable and empower, facilitate the board to be in the game and more effective and successful than maybe they are if it's just a group of folks hanging out? So what Bob and Dick highlighted, I'm talking about my sort of, for these times, what are the ways these play out, but effective executives actively and proactively work to facilitate interaction among board members, board leaders, and the executives of the agency. You know, this doesn't sound like rocket science. Frankly, in some ways it's not, but it's funny how often you have to say things that aren't rocket science sometimes. They are attentive to showing consideration and respect toward board members. The fact that they're not inside, maybe they don't know your business, doesn't mean that they don't deserve consideration, respect, and in fact that you value and engage them on the things they can bring in. Envisioning together innovation and success, providing leadership. But by the way, leadership is not governance, it's not control, it's partnering to bring the organization and all the parts of it together, whether it's your staff, your board, your clients for that matter. These executives initiate structure, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. They work to make sure that the board has the information it needs to be successful, and I'll be talking about that as well. They help the board learn, engage, and do the job well. Candidly, I've worked with some executives in my career whose philosophy was, hey, let's keep them in the basement, let's keep them out of the way so they don't mess it up. Well, you know, legally the board can step in when it wants, so you better be careful of that attitude. But the flip side of it is, what a waste. You've got talent there in multiple forms, engage it. So my list of 5 key ways, last week I talked about board supporting the executive. This week it's kind of a parallel list. How does the executive team work to support the board and its members? Well, so be proactive, lead, communicate, be an accountability partner, and provide that structure. It was alluded to a minute ago. So I will share a little bit more about each of these and try to encourage you to think about, how does this apply in your own context? How does it apply in your own situation? So, you know, it's been interesting throughout the recession, the sheltering at home, being off-site and all of this. One of the things that comes up repeatedly in all of these workplace dynamic research projects, surveys, et cetera, is people feeling isolated. So, you know, as executives, as leaders of the agency on the staff side, let them know we care and that we're thinking about them. Be present, be engaging them on a regular basis. Now, does that mean every day you write to every board member? No, probably not. And in fact, if you've got a team, you can start getting a dynamic going where people can support each other, but you can keep that ball going if you accept that metaphor. One of the things that's so critical, recognize and appreciate the anxiety that the board leaders and members feel. You know, people do not like being in a situation where they don't feel as though they understand or are especially competent at doing whatever it is they're supposed to be doing. It feels crummy. So let's try to help recognize, and my next points are, and help undermine that sense of anxiety, help them at least feel better to the extent we can. That means to me being candid but supportive at the same time, and being empathetic. I think empathy is such a critical issue. We've got to be empathetic to what each of these folks is feeling, and we need to be all these things with our boards all the time, but during these especially unique and extreme times, it's even more true. Big shock. I think a critical role of the executive director is to lead. But what does that really mean? Well, for me, what that means is that we help grow the board's capacity, which means we often end up setting things up. The last item that I talk about will be creating structure, but it flows through all these things. Are we setting things up so that we help board leaders engage in work that's really effective and strong? And the leadership part of this is all about inspiring and encouraging, helping them remember in the face of all this ugly stuff that's going on, what is the mission? What's the big picture? And frankly, that means you sharing it. But one of my favorite behavioral models of leadership is one by Kouzes and Posner. They articulate 5 core behaviors of effective leaders. Well, one of the pivotal ones, and the one that frankly is not practiced as often as some of the other ones, is to inspire a shared vision. Now, hopefully you have a vision and you can remind people, this is why we're here, this is what it's about. We've got to deal with the crap and we've got to deal with these weird circumstances, but this is still what we're about. And sharing insights and ideally trying to be both, here's a balancing act, but being honest, but also optimistic. How do we work to achieve the vision? Now, if you don't have a vision, this is a time to make sure you go back and engage people in articulating what that might be. This element of leadership, inspiring a vision, it includes, as I argued last week for us as executives too, we must exhibit emotional intelligence. We've got to model that kind of behavior, and that means being aware of our situation. Now, candidly, we have to cut ourselves some slack, because there are days when it's just like, man, this just washes over you, and it's nuts. But the flip side of it is we need to be thoughtful about how are we engaging folks, and what is the impact on that. And the fact that you want to go out and scream, mute the machine for a little bit, scream, and then come back. This is the category of self-regulation, because we have even an outsized impact. And when people are especially confused about what's going on, they're going to look to you for cues about even how depressed or worried or freaked out should we be. So one of the things that I shared in one of the other governance sessions, but I'm reminded of it with this particular category of leading, is Warren Bennis, researcher who used to be with the University of Cincinnati. He's written dozens of books. They're good books, although he tends to repeat himself a lot from book to book. That said, he did some great research about what are the core competencies of effective leadership. And the 4 things that he identified were effective leaders help first by managing attention, helping people figure out, what do I pay attention to? More important than ever in a time of change. And then as you've got people's attention, the question is, what does this mean? Helping people make sense of the meaning of our work. What is it that we should infer or not from this? And by the way, I'm not saying this to say, as the executive, you tell them everything. It's that you facilitate talking through this and sharing your perspective, but also getting other views along the way. The third of the competencies he talked about was the management of trust. Certainly a pivotal relationship characteristic for working with boards, and also staff, constituents, other stakeholders as well. And the fourth of the competencies he talks about is the management of self. That gets back to that self-regulation. Are we in fact aware of our impact on others? Are we paying attention to it as we go? The third of the sort of key things that we as executives can and need to do to support and enable our boards to perform well is communication. I realize it sounds like I'm balancing these things a lot when I combine these adjectives and verbs, but I really do think the notion of trying to inspire realistic confidence that we are in this, we can get through this together. By the way, one of the things that was interesting about Bennis's research on management of self is that effective leaders in managing themselves can envision being successful in the conditions and circumstances that they're trying to lead and address at the time that they're involved in that. That ability And you know, I mean, we need help from each other to encourage each other and see, well, how are we going to work on things to help each other and help each other make our way through it. But what does that mean? You know, and of course, personal style sometimes has a bearing on this, but you know, we need to have that balance of communicating. And some of us, when you're stressed and you don't know what to do, it's kind of like you hunker down, you don't communicate, you isolate until you sort it out. Candidly, board members, your colleagues, your staff, they all need to engage. And so working on that is important. Now, here's where one of the critical things is. By the way, it's not always handled well with boards in general, but it's definitely an issue when it comes to times of major change and disruption. We need to be explicit with people about, well, what is it we need from them? How can they help us? Most board members want to help, and they get frustrated when they can't figure out what it is. And so, frankly, they drop out of the relationship because there's not the reciprocity and clarity such that they can do much. So, you know, by the way, this may mean, okay, I got to go back and think this through a little bit before I share it with people. Well, what is it I need? And sometimes it's not actually really big stuff. It's not even appropriate or feasible to ask for really big help. But what are the manageable chunks of work that the board can do? And by the way, you know, behind this, but I should have said it more explicitly earlier on, this is always work that you as an executive need to be engaging with your board chair. Board chair working with your executive, please work to bring that executive into this kind of communication and dynamic along the way. Invite them to be a part of this and communicate in multiple ways. One of the things that I learned in the change leadership stuff that I was working on 35 years ago is that under times of stress, and I had to learn this the hard way because I wasn't good at actually recognizing it, you can communicate things to people, but depending on what's going on in their world and their life at that point in time, they may not be attending to it, or they may not be hearing it at all or accurately. So the mantra in the change leadership stuff is communicate in multiple and redundant ways. Multiple, like, so you can meet different style needs. Some people want to know the people stuff, some people want to know the vision, some people want to know what's the actual plan, the operational plan. We need to meet their information needs. This needs to happen all the time, not just in stressful times. But of course, it's harder because we revert back under stress to some of those earlier behaviors. I candidly, early in my career, I ended up, you know, acting like, well, I told you, I communicated this, so now I don't need to say it again. I said it. Well, okay. I learned the hard way that people didn't necessarily get it. They didn't process it well. And the more freaked out or stressful or distracted they are, the less they're hearing clearly what's going on. And so you can say, well, I said I need this help from you. Well, thinking about multiple ways of communicating so that in different times in different ways, people can get the idea of what it is they can do to help advance the agency's mission and purpose, and at the same time, you know, by doing the things that they uniquely can bring value to the agency to serve. Going back consistently to that big picture, what are the values and principles? The more we're in times of tough challenges and unique, very dramatic stresses, the more the anchor, metaphor of rough seas, the more the anchor is the principles and values and mission. Why are we here? Now, I was delighted last week when I was inviting some input from folks that one of our executive colleagues in town said, you know, I really need my board to be an accountability partner. And he was really talking about an accountability partner both ways. And I obviously liked it because I've used the same category here, although it looks different when you're executive working to your board. But what does an accountability partner really mean? Well, again, starts with communication and interaction, clarity about what are the goals and expectations for how we're working together, And ideally, you've set this out ahead of time. So what you're doing in this tough time is reinforcing or affirming the things that are most important that maybe are in a board manual, or in a board orientation, or things like that. But whether you've done it or not, again, helping people remember, well, these are the things that are most important. And by the way, for most agencies, being an accountability partner, the leadership part of it, I should have set it into the leadership category. Figure out which are the most critical and important things to do and hone in on those. We've got to hunker down or scale back, or whatever phrase you want to use, to hone in on what's going to be most significant and important to our stakeholders, to the community, to our effectiveness and sustainability as an agency. So that means clarifying the roles and responsibilities that each of us is serving in critical ways during this tough time. Presumably they're not radically different, but maybe you need to say, hey, I really need your help with this or that. One of the great examples of boards that stepped up in some cases, in other cases executives asked some of their board members to step up, was when the PPP loan stuff first came out. A lot of agencies that secured those loans, and frankly a lot of agencies that are going to be able to follow through and get them forgiven as the structure of the program was designed, it was because they had board members with unique financial expertise, a lot of connections. Unfortunately, this worked against certain nonprofits in our communities, but if you had relationships with banks, that made a big difference in whether you succeeded in getting and following through on those loans. I'm sure it'll make a difference when it comes to accounting for what you did. So, board members who maybe felt a little disconnected at times saw that they could actually come in and help with that task. And it was a very rewarding type of relationship for both the organization and the member when they could see that kind of success. And frankly, a lot of governance and board work doesn't show that clear a result in terms of getting a loan or something like that. But another part of the accountability partnership, though, and it's something that we have to think about, and boards kind of know this, but they don't know how to do it typically. It's not the kind of thing most people ever give much thought to. Help the board engage in thoughtful, systematic self-assessment and think about how it is that we can continue to develop, provide support, information, training, things like that for board members. Now that all sounds pretty heavy-handed, but what does actual regular self-assessment look like in practice? It should, I would say, be taking a few minutes when you're interacting with your board chair, taking a few minutes in board meetings to check in and say, how's it going? Do you need more information? How can we help you stay in touch and track with us along the way? It may be data for some people. It probably is compelling stories about sort of the prototypical client or some example. Obviously you want to be careful about overdoing it, but you highlight how you've been able to make a unique difference. This goes back to that business of helping encourage candor, but also optimism. Wow, this made a difference here. What a treat. Last but not least at all, the reality is this, this is last on my list, but really you should think about it at the beginning as you're pursuing all of these things. Effective executives, this goes back to Bob and Dick's research, they work with the board to provide structure and help the board organize itself to do things. Now, specifically, of course, as the executive, work with your chair, help them figure out what it is that is going on with various members of the board and help them connect the dots as you're thinking about how can the board during this unique and stressful time most add value to the performance of the agency. I said it already, but I'm going to say it again because it's explicitly about structure. Clarify and affirm roles. Clarify and affirm what we need. And by the way, one of the things that research on leadership has highlighted is structure work so that whoever's in this leadership relationship, followership leadership relationship, can experience small wins because it's so encouraging and it helps people remain positive even while a lot of stuff is bouncing around. So structure projects, little roles, assignments so that people have the potential of being successful. It's essential that we maintain a regular meeting schedule, and that's for the task purposes of governance and fiduciary accountability, oversight, all of those. But equally important is the pivotal relationship is a relationship. So it needs to be two-way, and that means we need to be connecting often enough that we can kind of stay in touch. One of the things we need to do, well, a couple things we need to do. We need to make it easy as possible for our board colleagues to prepare for and then participate in a meeting. Some of the stuff that's pretty easy for some of us is very confounding or confusing for others. How do you log in on a Zoom meeting? I mean, I've found, as I've worked with a couple of boards, I've set up a sort of a dummy Zoom meeting the day before we were actually going to work with them on a retreat project. And the reason for it was so they could just log in and see at whatever pace they were working through this, and maybe with the help of some other family member or agency advisor or somebody, just helping them. How do I navigate this Zoom stuff or WebCT or Microsoft Teams if you're using it, whatever the platform is. By the way, lots of boards are using board portals, and they're more useful now than ever before in the sense, board portals meaning websites. You're paying a fee for them, but it's where all the board's documents can go. It's where you can post and structure what's available. So when somebody logs in, they see, well, what's coming up at the next meeting? What are the information documents that I need to look at? How do I even know what it is we're going to be talking about? Part of this sharing process to me is fundamentally about making it, making shared decisions about when and how to meet, and things are going to change. I mean, it's staying consistent just because it's easy to predict is probably not going to align well with the changing realities of your environment. Now, as things keep changing, though, we've got to keep trying to make sure these members have what they need in order to be included. So are you working efficiently? And by the way, I should have said this early on. I'm saying this about executives supporting their boards, but of course it's about executives and those working with them in the agency. Many agencies, of course, have somebody in an administrative role who's an exceptional resource to the board. They're often very much appreciated by the board. Whatever mix of roles in your organization is appropriate, we need to get those pre-meeting communications out. We need to clarify, when are we communicating something because we're going to have a decision to make? When is it that we're going to be monitoring? So they need dashboards or other things. What is it that it takes to help everybody be in the game? And that may mean, it does in some ways, even though it might be pretty basic, providing training, providing support to help people engage and be in that process. And that includes support for your chair, especially if you have a new chair or someone who, for whatever reason, is less exposed. Some organizations have chairs who've been in corporate or other organizational settings where they're regularly on Zoom, probably tired of Zoom even. But other boards often will have board chairs or other people in leadership roles who are not familiar with the technologies, and so again, having some resources available for them is critical. So providing that structure is significant. I want to go back to the core theme. It's so important for us to grow a multifaceted culture of empathy. Ideally, you already have one, but these times are putting stresses on each of us, on all of us. Executives are especially at the intersection of these tensions, but so are our board members. And so appreciating that, which is not to say, oh, we won't ask them to do anything. Candidly, that can often help people feel better in a time of challenge if they're needed and if there's a role they can play that's manageable and they can be successful. That can be very beneficial for their mental health as well as for the success of the agency. So my question for you, how are you doing so far? Are you investing, are you, your board, is everybody investing in each other and actively supporting each other, trying to help everybody be successful and effective as we go through these tough times? And I would really like to invite you to share observations, challenge. I mean, certainly welcome pushback. You don't have to believe anything I've said. These are ideas that come from experience and research, but they're, you know, as one of my colleagues used to love to say, you've seen one board, you've seen one board. Every board is a little different, sometimes a lot different. And so, you know, these concepts and principles obviously vary in how you implement them, if at all, in your settings. How have you been? Let's shift to our group as a whole and just invite people. You know, unmute yourself and share an observation or print something in chat if you prefer. How's it going? How is it working for you to be supporting your board? Anybody care to just share some observations and thoughts? And by the way, you know, if we were in a workshop, you know, I would have warned you all at the beginning. You know, my job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So, you know, if you're looking comfortable, I might actually go after you. Now, I'm going to try to behave myself because we're on Zoom. We're not in a room together. But I will call upon some of my friends and colleagues with whom I've worked in the group here if nobody wants to weigh in. So with that threat having been issued, what are some of the ways you are finding it's both important and beneficial to support your board and to keep or draw them back into the game? What are your thoughts?
Hi, David. This is Rochelle Parker. I know you want us to show our face, but I'm in a position where I can't right now. But I'm with CAPA, the Child Abuse Prevention Association. Yeah. And I feel like it's been my responsibility for their experience to be normal and to be the same. And so while being transparent and while they know, you know, obviously what the world's issues are, I want to be as normal as possible because of all the other things going on in their life. And so in smaller discussions, we may have put out little fires or whatever, but by the time we come to the board meeting or to the committee meeting, we've explained the fire, but we've also said we've solved it and this is what's going on. So I think my board's anxiety overall has been pretty normal and manageable. So you may think that's good, bad, or indifferent, but that's been kind of our situation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate hearing that. And I think you're right. I mean, you know, it's funny, when the more freaked out the conditions are, the more any form of normalcy, as you've talked about, really does make a difference. And even if just a few things are going normally while everything else is spinning around crazily, that can be useful. What other thoughts, other experiences?
Hi, David. This is Brian Williams. Good morning, everyone. I just stepped into a new ED role on June 1st, and it's the first time I've ever been an ED. And so what I've done is really reach out to each and every board member and gone on what I've labeled Brian's listening tour to really have a one-on-one conversation with each one of our board members. And I have a few set of questions, but really it's about, what do you need to share with me? What do I need to understand stepping into this role? How can I help you? So really trying to be proactive, like you suggested.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I want to commend you for that, Brian. Some of my associates in town who have less experience and frankly don't understand the magnitude of what you're talking about have said to me, good grief, I think I must spend 15 to 20% of my time just dealing with the board. You know what? That's not, it varies from organization to organization, but that's not a shocking statistic. The issue is, are you able to leverage and draw impact from having invested that time and built that relationship in the way it is? And candidly, one of the things I've discovered in this very strange triple whammy time, the pandemic, the recession, and just trying to rethink how we're all behaving and respectfully working with each other with all of the civil social justice issues that are emerging, or at least we're becoming more aware of them. Sometimes we've been taking care of things that were really a good thing to take care of, but we didn't even appreciate it because while everything was going normally, it's kind of like, oh, I mean, okay, yeah, that's just fine. I mean, it's not worth it. But in times of stress, drawing on that well of trust and the relationship and all those things is more important than ever. And the fact that you even know each other, I mean, Brian, to go back to your point, they've seen you and interacted with you. And so there is something there. I mean, and of course it needs to be collectively as well as individually there, but it starts with just knowing and greeting and meeting people as people. Other thoughts? What have you done others of you, just what have you done to really try to help your board stay in the game in the most productive and constructive way?
Hi, Dave. This is Shahid Qadri. I'm a board member of IRC.
Oh, yeah.
And have a 46 years experience in Black and Veatch as one of the senior executives. One of the points, I've sent you a couple of comments there, but one of the most important things, which I believe is to have a clearly defined vision and mission and have everyone on board and committed to that. That is, I think, in my experience, the single most important aspect of having a very successful organization and a board relationship between the executives and the board.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I couldn't agree more. And again, having this shared frame of reference and a shared understanding, even if people perceive it and experience it a little differently, person by person, that the core principles, the mission, the vision, why are we here and how is the world going to be better when we do our work well?
I was able to drive IRC board towards very recently defining a vision and a mission.
Great.
And I think we are very, very good on that.
Well, that's good. And candidly, part of what adversity brings in the way of an opportunity to organizations is a chance to go back and talk with each other about, okay, we agreed during maybe a more stable time about this is our mission, this is our vision, this is why we are here. Let's talk about how that really applies today, given whatever blend of issues and challenges we're experiencing. Appreciate that observation. Other thoughts?
This is Shara Bryce with our Community Listens. And listening today has reminded me of the importance of communicate. What you said about, it's one thing to get to the place where we have that breakthrough moment and we can see with clarity and we inform people and we engage people and then we press on with the work. It really hit me that while we may have really provided great clarity in April and we've provided updates, the timelines keep shifting. And sometimes it feels like we're just doing our best, treading water and holding up the people around us, but to stop and to do what we did back in April with clarity, not just for board and for team members, but for our communities, on every level. That's where I'm really struck today. And it's so basic and it's what we should be doing, but it's that fresh reminder. Academic school years sometimes are a reset, a new year for people too. And a lot of the people we serve and engage with are governed by that. So it's a big opportunity. It's very timely. So I'm going to take away work on that today.
Oh, that's good. I appreciate that. And actually you bring up an interesting point, Shara, because you talk about, when is sort of a regular reset time, and different mission categories of organizations know them in different ways. If you're a theater, you've got, or a performing arts organization, you've got a season. As you said, we in the academic world have the academic year, and I mean, it's funny. Almost everybody relates to fall as a start for some form of education, activity kinds of things. And so, I mean, we try to leverage that at the Midwest Center. We think we're supposed to be here year round, but you know, you can leverage the symbolism of, okay, it's a fresh start. I mean, sometimes it's the beginning of a new fiscal year. Knowing what that is and using it, and I don't think this is disingenuous, using it as a chance to say, okay, we're starting over. I mean, candidly, that's one of the great things in my work as a professor. The optimistic thing is at the start of a new semester, everybody's starting from, depending on your view, ground zero or 100%. I personally prefer to position it as 100%. It's kind of like everybody's got an A. Hang in there, let's keep going. But you know, at the beginning of a semester, everybody starts over. And having those little reset points, I'm really delighted you brought that up. Thank you. What else?
Hi, David.
Hello, Elena.
I was wondering if I can ask the group a question. I'm a new executive director, started like Brian Williams on June the 1st, and my board meets every other month. And in between, I'm trying to get good communication with Zoom meetings and everything, but it's going not to the speed that I would like to. And on top of it, there was a gap of leadership. So now my board wants to meet in person because they're lacking in-person communication. And I see the importance of that. But half of the board is not comfortable doing that. So I was wondering, have you experienced that kind of out of a normal picture situation? Because I understand the big picture is good to implement our mission, but at the same time, there is a really good, strong push for in-person meeting.
Yeah, boy, and that's a tough one right now in a lot of ways. What if you said, introduce this by saying you had a question for your colleagues? What are people doing about this, and how are you both keeping people in the game, but also where and how does in-person meetings fit into your practice at this stage?
I'll take a swing at it. So I'm Nicole, and I staff 4 different councils and boards affiliated with UMKC. And we had one group that was interested in starting to do in-person meetings again. And for a variety of reasons, we've elected not to, but a big reason was we have a lot of vulnerable members on that council and board who are in higher risk categories, either by age or by illness already, and had previously disclosed to me and to their board chair. So for that reason, we're just electing to host things virtually. And, you know, it's not as ideal as being in a room together, just like, you know, we're here virtually together, but the dynamic would probably be different if we were all in a room. But for health and safety of the greater group, we have just gone ahead and with the chairs and council's support, said, you know, at this time, we just don't feel for the safety of the group that it's right, but let's engage virtually.
Yeah. That's a great point. You know, one of the things that strikes me, and I invite others to weigh in as well, is as you become aware that there's this press and this enthusiasm, or at least this interest in meeting, to not treat it only as a yes or no question, but to think, you know, kind of like our public health authorities are trying to do now, you know, when and under what conditions will we be in a position to meet, and candidly, meet in person. Another part of it is, you know, there may be a point in transition along the way. We're trying to navigate and waffle on this a bit in higher ed, where, you know, some people can be in the room, but those who are more threatened from a health vulnerability perspective can log in. I will tell you candidly, I hate meetings where half the people are on the phone and half the people are in the room. That said, to not meet is even more of a problem. So I think working with folks and trying to be empathetic about the threats and stresses that people are navigating, and maybe coming to consensus about when it will be appropriate. I mean, is it when a majority of people are feeling safe to come back together? Is it, I don't advocate this, but is it when the board chair says, okay, I feel good about it, let's all do it? I'm not so much in favor of that dictatorial strategy, but I think that's something to think about. Janet, did you have a comment? Looked like you had unmuted yourself along the way there.
Yes, I did. Well, here to everything that's been said so far, building on your point of structure, you know, particularly in times of uncertainty, this is maybe a time when executive directors working with their board presidents can try to introduce some structure and kind of say, during this period of time, here are some of the things we're going to look for guidance. And part of it is what's out there that can give us some parameters of when it's safe to meet in person or when it's safe to bring our workers back into our workplaces. So CDC guidance, the document that was put together by the chamber, Midwest Regional Council, you know, cooperatively of a guideline to safe return to work is a good thing to go by. Another piece of structure, particularly when you're incoming in a new position, is to look at what's your organization's history of the activity of your governing committees and how active have they been compared to full board decision making. And if you have the ability to activate your committees during this time of uncertainty, that can be a way for board members to feel very involved. And it also can be a way for the board to transition into more effective full board meetings when you do meet, whether it be virtually or in person. And that seems to be a way too for you to be able to build relationships in smaller groups towards productive outcomes, you know, as you're building and supporting your organization's culture or perhaps new culture that you're bringing in your role.
Yeah. Susanna Byrne, you have your hand up.
Yeah, we have a couple of new members. So our last meeting, we tried to actually get people at the meeting, and one of the new members came, and it was just the two of us, and the other board members who are younger than I and don't have any diseases actually are, you know, it's been convenient for them to meet on Zoom. And so basically that was the reason why they didn't attend. So we're going to make it a mandatory meeting next meeting. I'm not saying that all the rest of the meetings this year will be mandatory, but just for the new members, to really get a feel for the board, and especially since we're having online events, they are missing a big, you know, what is Gilded, our art business organization, all about. So there is one board member though that I have that is senior in age, and so I may opt for her not to. For her not to meet, or for us to go to her location, because she's with another nonprofit. But two, you have to watch out for board members feeling very comfortable with Zoom, you know, because they can quickly leave the Zoom meeting and go to dinner or go to the kids, but yeah, you have to be conscious of those Zoom members who are older and have a pre-existing condition. You don't want to expose them.
Yeah.
And then two, you know, we have a conference room at the nonprofit village, but we also have a big event area, and you know that can easily be used as a board meeting area.
Yeah, well, that's great. And that's thinking about, you know, what resources do we have. One of the things that's critical, of course, as you said, is and you do want to be thoughtful about not marginalizing the involvement of some members because of health conditions or health status or something like that. And, you know, again, it's where being empathetic, now, you know, candidly, there's even a legal part to that. If you start leaving people out because of health conditions, depending on the situation, you're being unethical, you may even be being illegal, and the last thing you need to do is to end up in a legal stress because of how you're trying to cope. Unfortunately, people who, if you're an employee and you experience that, you'll often push back. If you're a board member, you may just be missing in action, but that can often be part of the constituency we really need to hear from too. So I think part of the benefit of this strange time is going to be that we are trying different things out, and we're gaining some new insights about what does and doesn't work. And frankly, a lot of people are getting introduced to remote technologies like Zoom, even though they never thought they wanted to, and they're now finding it at least works somewhat well. So, well, we have approached the end of our time here, and I want to thank you very much for joining us for another session. Next week, the focus of our session is going to be how do board, and by the way, this is less about these challenging times than it is just strategies. And again, we'll be asking you to share what you see. What are strategies for facilitating, encouraging engagement among various board members, and how do we keep them excited, interested, etc. So I look forward to seeing you all next week.